Steve Harvey has a face that television loves. Expressive, mobile, capable of producing reactions that an audience can read from the back row. The raised eyebrow, the widened eyes, the slow, deliberate look that says more than a speech. Over 30 years of live performance, he has learned to calibrate those expressions with professional precision. He controls what his face does. He decides what the camera sees. On a Friday afternoon at the Family Feud studio in Atlanta, he lost that control for a moment. Not dramatically, not the theatrical jaw drop of a prepared host executing a planned beat. Something smaller and more telling. The involuntary flinch of a man who has heard something he did not expect, and whose face registered it before his professional training could decide whether to let it show. The word that produced it was a single one. It came from a husband named Leonard Parrish, standing at the side of the stage, answering a warm-up question with the casual ease of a man who believed he was making a joke. He used the word to describe his marriage. The word was fake. He said it without hesitation, without qualification, with the light delivery of someone who expected a laugh. The audience did not laugh. His wife, standing 3 feet away, went very still, and Steve Harvey's face did the thing it had not done in 30 years of live television. It moved before he could stop it. What came next was not a confrontation in the usual sense. It was something more careful, and in its carefulness, more powerful. A host using the one tool that a 30-year career had given him to see exactly what was happening in a marriage, and deciding that the people inside it deserved to understand it too. Annette Parrish was 58 years old, a senior librarian at a public library system in Charlotte, North Carolina. She had worked for the same library system for 27 years, beginning as a reference librarian, moving through branch management, and arriving at her current role overseeing acquisitions, programming, and community outreach across 4 branches. She was a woman who had spent her career building spaces where people could come to learn and be left alone while doing it, a quality she had brought to the work because she understood it personally. She was a reader in the way that librarians who love their work tend to be readers. Widely, across genres, with the specific pleasure of someone for whom the company of a book is not a consolation but a genuine preference. She was quiet in public settings, in a way that people who did not know her sometimes misread as reserve, and that people who knew her understood as attention. She was paying attention. She was always paying attention. She simply did not announce it. She had married Leonard Parrish 32 years ago. Leonard, 61, was a sales director for a regional pharmaceutical distribution company, a role he had held for 14 years, overseeing a team of 22 sales representatives across the Carolinas and Virginia. He was a big, sociable man with the professional fluency of someone who has spent a career building client relationships and who applies that fluency to every room he enters, whether or not a client is present. He was loud in the way that some people are loud, not aggressively, but as a default setting, a factory configuration that he had never been asked to adjust and had therefore never adjusted. They had 2 children, their son Derek, 30, who worked in corporate finance in Raleigh, and their daughter Melissa, 27, who was a graphic designer in Charlotte, living 12 minutes from her parents and seeing them, by her own description, more often than any of them planned. The Family Feud team was completed by Leonard's younger brother, Calvin, 57, a retired police detective from Greensboro who approached the game with the evaluative precision of someone who had spent 30 years reading situations for what they actually were, rather than what they presented as. Melissa had submitted the application. She had done it as an anniversary gift, their 32nd, with the specific motivation of a daughter who loves both her parents and who had been watching, over the past several years, the particular way in which 2 people can share a life without fully sharing it. She had submitted the application hoping that a day in an unusual place, doing something together, might produce a moment of genuine connection for 2 people who had been professionally competent at their marriage for a long time, without being particularly present within it. She had been trying to do something good. She had not anticipated that the day would produce honesty rather than connection, or that the honesty would come from the direction she least expected. The Parrish marriage, at 32 years, was functional in the specific way that long marriages between 2 competent, self-sufficient people can be functional, organized around shared logistics, compatible in most practical respects, and sustained by the accumulated weight of 3 decades of investment, neither party quite willing to examine whether the investment was still producing what they had originally intended it to. They had never had a dramatic rupture. They had also not, in some years, had a dramatic connection. What they had was a working arrangement worn smooth by time, which from the outside looked like a good marriage, and from the inside felt like something they both recognized, but had no particular language for. Leonard Parrish had language for it. He had always had language for things. He simply had not been placed, until this Friday afternoon, in a situation where the language came out before he had decided to let it. The Parrish family arrived at the studio on a Friday morning with the relaxed energy of people who had dressed for a good time and intended to have one. Melissa was visibly excited. She had been the one to organize the trip, had driven her parents and Calvin from Charlotte the night before, and had spent the drive preparing her family for what she described, inaccurately, as a low-stakes day. Calvin had been studying survey answer patterns since the confirmation call. Arrived, which he described as not studying and which everyone recognized as studying. Leonard was in his element from the moment they arrived, expansive, warm, filling the green room with the easy sociability that was simply how he occupied space. Annette was present and pleasant and, as she generally was in public settings, paying attention to everything around her without requiring the room to notice that she was doing it. Their opponents were the Merritt family, from Asheville, North Carolina. A compact, sharp five-person unit anchored by a 55-year-old woman named Gail who had the competitive fluency of someone who had raised 4 children competitively and had transferred those skills with full retention. Steve Harvey and Gail established an immediate and robust rapport. The Parrish family, watching from the side, calibrated themselves accordingly. Steve Harvey worked both families in the pregame. He spent time with Calvin, who turned out to be an extraordinary interview subject, a retired detective who answered every question with the economical precision of someone who has learned that the most important thing is accuracy, not elaboration. Steve asked him what 30 years in law enforcement had taught him about people. Calvin said that most people are exactly who they are. They just spend a lot of energy making sure you don't see it clearly. Steve Harvey looked at him for a beat and said, "That might be the truest thing anybody has ever said on this stage." He turned to Annette. He learned what she did, asked what 27 years in a library had given her, and received an answer that appeared to genuinely interest him. A very accurate model of what people are actually looking for versus what they say they're looking for. In a library and everywhere else, Steve laughed. "She's dangerous," he told the audience. Annette allowed the precise, small smile of a woman who has been told she is dangerous before and considers it a fair assessment. He turned to Leonard. Leonard was ready, had been ready since they arrived, in the way that people are ready when the setting is one they are naturally suited to. He was quick and expansive and gave Steve Harvey the kind of material that fills a pre-game warmly and efficiently. Steve asked him what the secret to a 32-year marriage was. Leonard grinned. The practiced grin of a man who has been asked this question at corporate dinners and anniversary parties and has a well-worn answer for it. "Honestly," he said, in the tone of a man about to offer a well-calibrated piece of self-deprecating candor, "I think we just got good at faking it." He said it with a grin and a gesture toward Annette that was meant to invite her participation in the joke. He said it in the register of a man who had said versions of this line at corporate dinners and expected the laugh that lines like this produce in rooms where people have agreed, implicitly, that certain truths can be said lightly. The room did not produce the laugh. It produced the specific silence of 200 people who have recognized, simultaneously, that a line has been delivered in the wrong register for the truth it contained. Annette Parrish had gone very still, not with hurt, with something quieter and more complicated. The expression of a woman who has heard something she already knew and is absorbing the experience of hearing it said out loud, in public, by the person who should have said it privately. Steve Harvey's face did the thing it had not done in 30 years of live television. He caught it almost immediately, the professional discipline reasserting within a second. But the camera caught it first. The involuntary flinch, the brief, unguarded expression of a man who has heard something that hit a register he was not prepared for. He looked at Leonard. He looked at Annette. He looked briefly at the audience. The look of a man who has just understood exactly where he is and what he is going to do about it. "Hold on," he said. "I need to come back to that." The game was played first. Steve Harvey returned to his hosting function with the practiced ease of a man who has learned to compartmentalize. And the game ran its course, won by the Parrish family on a steal from Derek in the third round that sent the room into legitimate celebration. The fast money round produced 189 points combined. with Annette scoring 81 of them in a display of survey answer accuracy that reflected 27 years of building an accurate model of what people were actually looking for. They won the $20,000. The family celebrated. The taping should have ended. Steve Harvey was not finished. After the prize was confirmed and the immediate celebration had settled, he returned to the pre-game exchange in the quiet, deliberate way of a man who had been holding something and had decided it was time to address it. "Leonard," he said, "I want to go back to something you said before the game about faking it." Leonard's grin reappeared, the corporate dinner grin still ready. "That was a joke," he said. "You know how it is." "I know how it looked," Steve said, "but I watched your wife's face when you said it, and I don't think it was entirely a joke. And I think she knows it wasn't entirely a joke, and I think you know that too." The grin held for one more second. Then it became something else. Not collapse, not defiance, but the specific expression of a man who has been seen more clearly than he had intended to be seen and is deciding whether to retreat into the performance or step out of it. After a moment, he stepped out of it. "Okay," Leonard said, quietly. In a register, the room had not heard from him in the previous 2 hours. "Okay, maybe it wasn't entirely a joke." Steve Harvey let that sit for a beat. Then he turned to Annette. "Annette, you heard him say it, and I watched you hear it. I want to ask you something, not for the show, for you. When was the last time this marriage felt real to you?" Annette was quiet for a moment in the way she was quiet. Before she said something, she had been thinking carefully. She looked at Leonard, then at the audience, then back at Steve Harvey. "There are real things in it," she said. "Our children, the life we built, those are real. But if he's asking whether we're present in it, whether we're actually there with each other rather than just maintaining it." She stopped. She looked at Leonard. "I think we both know the answer to that. I think we've known it for a while. I think neither of us has said it because it's easier not to." The room was very still. Leonard looked at his wife. Not the look of a man performing for an audience. The look of a man who has been given, unexpectedly, in a television studio in Atlanta, the conversation he had been not having for several years, and who is recognizing it as the conversation it is. "I don't want it to be fake," he said. It was the simplest thing he had said all day. "I never wanted that. I don't know when it started to feel that way, and I don't know how to say that at home." "You just said it," Annette said. "Here." The room exhaled. Steve Harvey stood between them and did not speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice was the private register, the one that does not reach for anything larger than what the moment requires. "I want to say something about what just happened. Not to you two. You know what just happened. I want to say it to everyone in this room and everyone watching at home who recognized something in what they just heard." He looked at the audience. "There are a lot of long marriages that sound like this, that feel like this. Two people who have built something real, children, a home, a life, who have gotten so good at maintaining the structure that they forgot to tend to what's inside it. That's not a failure. That's what happens when two capable people decide, over and over, that the conversation can wait." He paused. "The conversation cannot wait." Leonard Parrish called his marriage fake as a joke on a game show, and it produced the most honest exchange I have heard in this studio in a very long time. Because the joke had truth in it, and Annette heard the truth, and she named it, and he let her name it. He looked at both of them. "That is not the end of something. That is the beginning of something, if you let it be." Melissa, in the audience, was crying in the way of a daughter who has watched two people she loves be honest with each other for the first time in her recent memory, and does not know exactly whether to feel relieved or grieved, and is feeling both. Derek had his arm around her. Calvin was sitting very straight with his arms folded, the expression of a man who has spent 30 years reading situations for what they actually were, and is watching this one become exactly what it was. Leonard looked at his wife for a long moment. Then he said, "Can we talk tonight?" "Actually talk?" Annette said. "Yes, tonight and tomorrow, and however long it takes." She said it in the even, deliberate voice of a woman who has spent 27 years building spaces where people could come and do the work they needed to do. She had just opened one more. The episode aired on a Wednesday evening. The clip moved with the specific velocity of content that people recognize as their own situation, not someone else's. Distributed widely but personally, forwarded between partners, shared by adult children to their parents, sent between friends with the kind of caption that does not explain itself because it does not need to. Within 48 hours, it had been viewed 29 million times. Within the first week, 63 million. The audience response, say, was notable for its specificity. The comments were long and personal, and a significant proportion of them were written by people who had been in long marriages describing their own version of the thing Leonard had named. The word fake generated its own secondary discussion, not because it was accurate as a description of what a long marriage actually is, but because it was accurate as a description of how a long marriage can feel to two people who have been maintaining its structure without tending its interior. Marriage and family therapists cited the clip widely, noting that Leonard's unintentional honesty had named a pattern they spent entire sessions helping couples locate: the specific drift of two self-sufficient people who have become so competent at managing a shared life that they have stopped being present within it. Melissa, the daughter who had submitted the application, gave one interview in which she said, "I submitted that application because I wanted to give my parents a good day together. What I got instead was watching them have an honest conversation for the first time in years. I don't know whether that counts as the gift I intended. I think it might be a better one." She paused. "I think my mother has been paying attention to this for a long time. I think she knew exactly what my father meant when he said it. She was just waiting for a room big enough that he couldn't take it back." Derek gave no statement. He drove back to Raleigh the Saturday after the taping and called both parents separately on Sunday, as he had always done, and did not mention the clip in either conversation. He did not need to. The conversations were longer than usual, which was enough. Calvin, the retired detective, made one public remark in a brief exchange with a journalist outside the hotel the evening of the taping. "My brother said something true by accident and then had to decide whether to be honest about it. He chose honest. That took more courage than he usually gets credit for." Then he declined further comment because he was a retired detective and understood exactly how much of a situation needed to be on the record. Leonard and Annette Parrish began seeing a couples counselor 3 weeks after the taping. This was Annette's initiative, offered in the practical, organizational manner of a woman who has spent her career building spaces where work gets done. She identified two options, presented both, and asked Leonard which suited his schedule. He chose the one with the earlier Thursday appointment. He has not missed one. What the counseling produced was not a transformation in the theatrical sense. It was, by both accounts, slow and non-linear, and occasionally uncomfortable and productive in the way that genuine work is. Productive, not dramatically, but cumulatively. Leonard became quieter in certain registers, Annette became louder in certain others. The adjustment was mutual, incremental, and ongoing. This is to say, it was real. The follow-up segment was filmed 5 months after the taping from the living room of their Charlotte home. The same house they had shared for 24 years, full of the accumulated objects of a long shared life. They sat close together, with the comfortable proximity of people who have been in the same space for a long time, and have recently begun to be more deliberate about what that proximity means. Steve Harvey introduced the segment with characteristic economy. 5 months ago, Leonard Parrish called his marriage fake on national television. I could not hide my reaction. Neither could his wife. Here is where they are. Leonard spoke first. He was quieter than he had been in the studio. Not diminished, but adjusted, in the way of a man who has been recalibrating his default settings with deliberate effort. "I want to say something about the word I used," he said. "I used it as a joke, but jokes come from somewhere, and that one came from a real place that I had been not low, oaking at for a long time. I'm looking at it now. It's uncomfortable. It's also," he paused, "it's also the most real I've felt in years. So maybe the word was wrong. Maybe the marriage was never fake. Maybe I was just faking being present in it." Annette was asked what had changed in 5 months. She considered the question in the deliberate way she considered most things before answering. "He is there," she said. "That is the change. He is actually there. We have the same house, the same routines, the same life in most practical respects. But he is present in it now in a way that I had stopped expecting him to be, and I had stopped telling him that I needed him to be, so we were both responsible for the gap. We're both responsible for closing it." Steve Harvey, watching the segment in the studio, spoke afterward in the plain voice he uses when something does not require amplification. "Leonard Parrish said one word on this stage that his face told me was true before his brain finished. Deciding to say it, that word was fake. And what I have been thinking about for 5 months is not the word itself, it's what produced it. Two people who built something real, who raised real children, who have lived a real life together, who had gotten so good at the maintenance that they forgot to be present for each other." He looked at the camera. "That is not a rare story. I would argue it is one of the most common stories in long marriages. And most of the time, nobody says it out loud. Leonard said it on a game show by accident, and it saved something. He paused. If you are in a long marriage, if you have been maintaining something carefully without being fully present within it, I want you to hear this. The conversation that Leonard and Annette had in that studio is available to you. Tonight, at your kitchen table, in your car on the way home. It doesn't require a game show. It requires one person to say the true thing and the other person to be willing to hear it. That's all it has ever required. The $20,000 the Parrish family won was used in three portions. A contribution to Melissa's student loan balance, which had been on Leonard's mind for 2 years. A bedroom renovation that Annette had been planning and deferring for 4 years. At a trip that Leonard and Annette took alone, 10 days in Portugal, a country Annette had wanted to visit since reading a novel set there 12 years earlier. Leonard had not known this. He had not asked. He asked now and booked the flights the same week the follow-up segment aired. They went in the autumn. Annette brought 3 novels and read 2 of them. Leonard spent less time on his phone than he had on any trip in the previous decade. They ate dinner slowly and talked about things that were not logistics. They came home different in the specific, unannounced way that people come home different from trips that did what trips are supposed to do. Annette returned to her library. She continued to build spaces where people could come to do the work they needed to do. She brought that same quality home with her now in a more deliberate way, not creating a space for Leonard, but being present in the space they shared. There is a difference. She understood it. He was learning it. Leonard went back to his sales calls, his client dinners, the rooms he filled by nature and by profession. He was still loud. He had always been loud, but he had become, in the months since Atlanta, more aware of the specific difference between filling a room and being present in one. His team noticed. His clients noticed. Annette noticed most. 32 years. And a word said lightly on a Friday afternoon that turned out to be the most honest thing he had said in a very long time. The marriage, as it turned out, had never been fake. It had simply been waiting for someone to stop, performing in it long enough to be real.